Hello everybody, GamerZ here. In light of the recent mass shootings that have been taking place around the country these past few years, the video game industry is under fire yet again after the violence in video games debate has awoken from its slumber. I know, this is so 2005, forgive me, but this topic has been brought up again by none other than CNN. What the fuck? Okay, stop, time out. Just a quick question. Who has actually voluntarily and seriously put their email address in a newsletter pop-up like this? There's nothing that makes me hate a website more than pop-ups like this. If you wanted people to subscribe to your newsletter, put it as a column on the side, like you're gonna do anyway. Don't beg for subscriptions like a bunch of sad YouTube channels. CNN, people. The article starts off, of course, with the title. If a possible mass shooter wants to hone his craft, don't hand him a virtual boot camp. First of all, boot camps were made to train people. Video games were made to entertain people. I know they rhyme, but I assure you they're not the same thing. Oh, and in that CNN interview with Donald Trump, all he does is blame video games and movies for violence. I'm not going to bother playing the video, but I'll have the link to this article in the description below so you can watch it yourself. Alright, Jeremy Bailenson, let's see what you have to say about video games causing violence. He says, in the first paragraph, last week, Dick's Sporting Goods banned the sale of assault-style rifles, and Walmart raised the age of all gun buyers to 21. I suppose this is the start of gun control. Jeremy goes on to say, while our politicians debate next steps, these companies took swift action. Because apparently, while these stupid politicians just sit around bickering, the real solution is just to take guns off the market. Because that's somehow realistically possible in a country with 3.8 million square miles of land and 323.1 million people. If we wanted a chance of gun control working, we should have elected Hillary Clinton. She's a magician. She can make anything disappear. Guns, racism, hatred, bigotry, emails, the souls of children. And while it's nice to think about the ideal world, unfortunately Clinton's only able to work her magic on the last two items. Continuing on, Jeremy decides to connect gun control and video games. He states, virtual reality hardware and software companies which design top-selling video games should follow suit. Now, I'm seeing some imagery here. Why would he possibly talk about gun control to immediately switch the subject to video games? Well, the reason why is because Jeremy Bailenson believes that playing video games, is just as deadly as pulling the trigger of a gun. Because, apparently, using guns is just half the battle. Someone's gotta learn how to use guns, right? 'Cause that's what video games are for. Jeremy goes on to say, video games have one mandate, to be fun. But the companies that create and market them must also be socially and morally aware. They must consider the kinds of experiences they are developing, especially in first-person shooter games. Let me tell you, Jeremy, they are considering their experiences. It's to be fun. To be able to compete with other people, to be able to cooperate with other people, to be able to complete a storyline with either yourself or other people. Call of Duty comes to mind. This is an arcadey first-person shooter that allows you to compete with, 10, 20 other people in the lobby? But by playing in that lobby with 10 to 20 people, that's 10 to 20 asses you can kick. Get the highest score, get the most kills, get the least deaths. CSGO also comes to mind, a competitive 5v5 game, well, for the most part, unless you're a casual, that focuses on team play, coordination, game sense, and reflexes. Some more examples that come to mind. Borderlands, a cooperative adventure game. PUBG, at least if you're playing like a man, is a first-person game where you're pitted up against 100 people, and you're supposed to fight to the death. Anyway, these are all either competitive games, cooperative games, single-player games. The point is, the experiences that the developers are developing in these first-person shooter games are meant to be in a competitive nature, or in a cooperative nature, or in a storyline nature. Jeremy goes on to say, there is at least one documented case at least one, come on, you couldn't say like at least a higher number, come on, that's sad. Anyway, at least one documented case of a killer using a first-person shooter game to improve his combat skills. According to The Guardian, the Norwegian shooter, Jesus, Anders Breivik, hopefully, told the court in 2012 that he used a holographic aiming device in the game Call of Duty to develop his target acquisition abilities. First of all, who wants to bet this guy played it on console? Yeah, good job using aim lock on them, buddy. I don't think neither Jeremy nor Anders Breivik know how actual skills work. Not like it's hard to fire a gun anyway. A retarded monkey could shoot a gun. Thing is, though, holding the left trigger on a controller and letting pixels on a screen move for you to acquire your target, that's not the same thing as moving a 5-pound gun, keeping it on target with the target that you want to shoot, whether or not it's moving, shoot repeatedly, and get your crosshair back on target. I'm sorry, but these skills are not transferable. You have to actually know how to do each skill individually. You could be a #1 Call of Duty international gaming superstar, but without specialized, individualized, proper firearm training, your aim, dexterity, and everything about shooting a gun is going to be the equivalent of a retarded monkey. But you know what skill is transferable? You see, I like to cook. I like to prepare meals. And in order to do that, I have to use a chef's knife to cut various things, whether it's meat, fruits, vegetables, my own finger. Cutting various things with a chef's knife is rather similar to stabbing a human being or cutting a human being, slitting throats, cutting it like chicken. And I should know. In fact, if you learn how to keep your knife nice and honed and sharpened, I'm pretty sure it can do some major damage if given the opportunity. So an obviously transferable, almost murderous skill, cutting food, is somehow looked over by you claiming, as well as another person claiming, that a controller is helping him acquire targets. Something doesn't add up here. Even though chef's knives are way more commonplace than video games, and they're actually transferable skills in terms of how you use them, whether or not you're cutting food or cutting human organs, or perhaps cutting up a liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti, even though those things are true, you still somehow look at inanimate objects, a controller, and pixels on a screen, as training grounds for kids who want to shoot up schools. Now, I don't know if you've played video games or shot a gun or neither or both, but you must have less than half a brain if you think that pulling a trigger on a controller and moving a joystick to move pixels on a screen is in any way connected to each other. Jeremy goes on to say that Breivik played a two-dimensional game, which, no he didn't, he was playing Call of Duty, and if I remember correctly, that game uses 3D models in a 3D environment. But I might be wrong, I might be thinking of COD of Duty or something. I mean, what the fuck do I know? But virtual reality can take skill acquisition to a new level. Players can look all around the scene instead of just staring at a screen. Handheld devices vibrate to simulate touch. More importantly, players use their arms and body to engage in actual combat moves instead of just hitting buttons. As a result, the brain's motor system is engaged. Repeated movement while in a virtual reality causes changes in brain structure, which in turn improves performance in the real world. In other words, virtual reality is the ultimate training machine. Now, I went to the hyperlink in the changes in brain structure words, and it brought me to a review, not a study, of sensory motor training in VR. The review states in the abstract, "Here we review the existing experimental evidence regarding the beneficial effects of training in virtual environments on the recovery of function in the areas of gait, upper extremity, function and balance in various patient populations. We also discussed possible mechanisms underlying these effects." And I was actually rather intrigued at this. It turns out that VR can improve your motor function. Finally, we as gamers can finally say that video games can transfer skills from the game world into the real world. Ha! Take that, Karen. Oh wait, I forgot. This article isn't here to inform me. It's here to persuade me. Jimothy states, "My argument here is not that virtual reality games are going to cause people to become violent, or that the law enforcement or the military, for example, shouldn't have access to them. But if a possible mass shooter wants to hone his craft, we shouldn't hand him an over-the-counter digital boot camp." Again, digital boot camps video games are not. And if your argument really is here to say that video games aren't going to cause people to become violent, then what's your fear about this whole handing people digital boot camps? Furthermore, your argument shows that it's not the video games to blame, but rather the people that are playing those video games to blame. This goes hand in hand with another argument that I use for gun control. It's not the gun's fault that people are getting shot up. The reason why people are dying is because people behind the guns, pulling the triggers, are the ones committing violent acts of murder. The same principle goes with video games. It is not the video game's fault that someone who plays them ends up getting an idea from the video game to go enact that idea. What's more, is it's not the video game's intent to train people how to use guns, or train people how to be violent, or even train them how to use a gun. Believe it or not, you still are pushing buttons. You're not holding the real weight of the gun. You're not feeling the real recoil of a gun. You're not hearing the real sounds of a gun. Jeremy goes on and says, "And there are steps we can take to strike a balance between fun and safety." And unfortunately for you, that's not the case. You can have either one or the other. You have to sacrifice fun for safety, and safety for fun. And considering the fact that the argument for a digital boot camp is retarded, not to mention it's not the video game's fault that people are learning from these video games, also not to mention that the things that people are learning from how to move a controller that looks like a gun is still not the same thing as actually getting your hands on a gun and actually shooting a gun with a proper trainer. What's more, is that this quote-unquote transferable skill that you demonstrated with VR with that review is somehow more imperative to address rather than the tackling of football, or the hitting of a baseball bat in baseball, or cutting meat and other shit with a chef knife, or even professional dart players. Literally anybody can learn from any activity and apply that to a dangerous crime. Video games, of course, are no different. However, they deserve no special treatment because they are no different. Just because video games, and especially VR nowadays, is just a new coming industry, and that they're emerging at the same time news outlets decide to cover more mass shootings, doesn't mean that video games should deserve any special treatment at all. A 5-year-old can pick up a gun and use it. It doesn't take a genius to realize, especially with all the media out there, that by pulling the trigger of a gun, a bullet will come out the barrel and go straight. Oh, and he's a genius, okay? Jeremy suggests 2 ways to help with this. He says, first, let's change the physics of bullets. Think about a frisbee. In order to hit a target straight ahead, one needs to arc it to one side to account for its return swing. I think you're referring to a boomerang? Because as far as I know, frisbees don't come back. You throw them and they go straight for a very long time. If anyone needs to be taught about the real world, I'm thinking it's you. Anyway, he continues, if virtual reality bullets also traveled with a slight curve, then virtual shooters would always be pointing away from a target in order to eventually hit it. This learned side aiming would likely carry over to the real world, and people would have trouble hitting a target straight ahead. You must think gamers are retarded. Oh my god, that is the biggest crock of shit I've ever heard. First of all, the average age of a gamer is 30 years old. So that means gamers have been around for at least 30 years, or more. Now if I recall correctly, guns have been made back in the 1600s. I'm pretty sure it's common knowledge that guns shoot straight. In fact, a lot of gamers actually own firearms. And many more, I'm sure, have at least seen a movie of how guns are in action, and even more at least know how guns work. There's an explosion that causes a piece of metal to go out the fucking barrel. To say that ruining video games by making this shitty mechanic that bullets don't go straight is going to achieve anything, that's outright stupid. It's dumb, it's asinine, nobody's gonna fall for that. Say a dumb bastard actually does fall for it. How many shots do you think it'll take until he realizes, oh, my bullets are going straight out of the gun, not like a frisbee or boomerang or whatever the fuck you meant? Just keep in mind, it takes an average police officer 5 minutes to approach a scene. Now, my hunch is that the shooter's going to not be a retard and is gonna figure it out by the 5th shot. Especially if he's shooting in a public place where someone else gets hurt. Yeah, I think it's gonna be pretty quick for the guy to figure out, oh, this gun isn't shooting as I think it is. Jeremy goes on to say, a more subtle example can be seen in paintball, which has pellets that move slower than real bullets, and subsequently slightly change the way shooters aim the guns based on gravity, wind, and other factors. Except that much of that won't really matter anyway, because lots of mass shootings happen indoors. In fact, a lot of violent gun-based crimes happen close quarters. So what is ruining a video game's mechanics and changing the way bullets actually act, making the game way less realistic? How is that going to solve close quarters combat? How is that going to solve indoors mass shootings? And I think what's the most important is, how am I going to feel any safer knowing that a shooter who misses might only be an inch off on the first shot? Yeah, that's a subtle example and it's really going to buy me some time. No, all that does is ruin the realism for people who don't actually want to shoot up schools. You are taking an entire form of entertainment and suggesting ways to ruin it for the majority of people who don't commit crimes, because there's a small minority of people, small minority of psychopaths out there that are willing to kill people just because they think it's funny or whatever they think they're doing. But you apparently see that it's fit to actually change the way games are made for a really shitty way. I mean, this is the most stupid innovation I have possibly ever heard. This isn't gonna change anything. People aren't stupid. They're gonna adapt quickly, especially if they're smart enough to actually acquire a gun and come up with a plan to shoot up a school or something. I mean, you've gotta be joking. Aside from that nonsense first point, he has a second point that says, quote, guns in games shouldn't have the mechanics of real ones. You shouldn't hold a realistically weighted, gun-shaped object and pull a trigger in virtual reality. Instead, to operate a virtual gun, you should flick your wrist or bend your elbow. Oh boy, this is going to be fun to demonstrate. Hello everybody, this is Gamer Z. We're playing Kill Mr. Bad Guy. So I'm going to take my gun and I'm going to shoot him. How do I aim straight? My crosshair keeps moving to the right. How am I going to do this? Oh, my elbow doesn't work because that's just going to hit me in the face. Just moving it all around, it doesn't work. Here, let me try moving it. So I'm holding it like this. Maybe I can shoot it this way. Move my arm in a spinny manner. Maybe that'll get the gun to shoot. But wait, I can't aim straight. It's impossible to play this game. 2 stars! And that, Jeremy, is why we don't implement shitty game mechanics into video games just for the sake of safety. That game, Kill Mr. Bad Guy, had the worst game mechanics I have ever possibly played. It was impossible to kill him. That game was more broken than Fortnite at its best. Holy shit, it was impossible to complete one simple objective. How possibly can I aim a gun and bend my wrist at the same time? That's not gonna happen. The game is going to be impossible and super unfun to play. And at what cost? Because you think people are retarded? Because you think that people don't know how guns work? Guns are a popular tool in everyday life. We talk about war all the time, and in America, we have something called the internet. If you wanted to learn something, you Google it. What we also have, mind you, is the freedom of speech. We talk about wars, we talk about police shooting people, we talk about massacres all the time. In order to do that, we need to have a little bit of knowledge about how guns work. Gee, I wonder how he was able to kill 17 people in Florida. By God, Jeremy, it doesn't take a genius to figure out how a gun works. And it certainly doesn't take a genius to shoot one. If you think the gun debate can be solved by ruining video games of all things, then you are entirely misguided, and you're an idiot. You're completely oblivious to the fact that, 1, you can go to the internet and Google how to shoot a gun. Secondly, there's actual training centers in America so you can learn how to shoot a gun. Those aren't video games, and in fact, they teach you better than any virtual reality headset can do. These are just the shittiest the shittiest solutions I've ever heard in my life. It's actually a worse solution than castrating men to stop rape. I don't know where CNN gets their journalists from, but obviously they're not very educated. And you certainly don't even care about video games to think that you can ruin them for the name of safety. Jesus Christ, that is sad. That is actually sad. Now, I've already discounted this idea, but he says, before you discount this idea, think about the widely entertaining types of weapons one typically sees in superhero movies. Guns that are far too big for normal people to carry, for example. This way, muscle memory for virtual guns will be abstract. A player can log hundreds of hours as a virtual shooter and be utterly perplexed when picking up an actual gun. This means, in order to follow Jeremy's code of conduct, or standards for making a video game, you can't make any realistic guns. But I do believe that goes against what the First Amendment says, because video games are a work of art, they are freedom of speech, and they're protected as such. You're saying that in order to make a video game, you have to make it with non-realistic guns, so going against the creative design of who actually makes games, and to effectively ruin the way games are played by adding in shitty mechanics that would ultimately ruin video games. We play video games because they're fun, not because we want to murder people, and you're ruining it for the majority of people who just want to sit back and relax after a hard day's work, or just to have fun for whatever reasons we may have. You really are painting video games as a virtual boot camp for mass murderers. Unbelievable. And to think that gamers are retarded again, and that they don't know how guns work again, and assuming that players will never touch an actual gun in their life, even though a lot of gamers do own firearms. You're assuming that video games are the only outlet in which people can learn about guns, or perhaps movies. But no, that's not the case. A lot of people have heard about guns. In fact, I'd be surprised if you didn't hear about how guns work, or even what a gun looked like. Hey there, I'm just a video gamer. I pick up this P99 and I have no clue how to use it. Gee, what's this trigger do? And that's how accidents happen. For better or for worse, people will learn how to use firearms. And in that respect, I suggest people learn the right way how to use firearms, so that that shit doesn't happen. So that people don't stumble across a random object in the street, figure that it's cool, ooh, it weighs 5 pounds, what's this thing do, and it happens to be loaded, and kills somebody. Ignorance is not bliss. This isn't a utopia without guns. There are guns everywhere. Jeremy just keeps on talking. I'm sorry, this is the last few paragraphs, I promise. He says, another change that makes sense, and I'm happy that most, though not all, virtual reality games are adopting this strategy, as if to imply that this creative approach is to somehow stop school shootings, which it's not, is to have the targets in games be non-human. Again, as I said, this isn't a strategy to stop school shootings or to stop murder or to make games less violent and make them more PG. In fact, a lot of gamers like playing as humans. A lot of gamers like the realism of video games. However, that's a double-edged sword because there are people that don't like the realism in video games. Not necessarily the realism, but more like, I want to play as something other than human. That's where those other games come into effect. That's where those other games get bought. They get bought by people who are tired of playing as humans or aren't interested in playing as humans in the first place, and instead would rather focus on a either sci-fi world or totally fictional world. But this is to show that people have their own tastes. People like having a variety of games. Completely taking out one genre, that is realistic FPS, is going to be a complete, utter mistake. It will ruin video games. And just because you think that people shooting at robots isn't going to make them want to shoot at people, because that's not true, doesn't mean that you should ruin it for the majority of us who don't want to do that anyway, regardless if we're shooting at humans in a video game, or regardless if we're shooting at robots or televisions or whatever the fuck we're shooting at in a video game. You're just going to ruin the fun, the variety, for the rest of us. By this assumption that handing people these boot camps for killing, you're saying that they don't inherently make people violent, But it really sounds like that's what you're thinking. Deep in your mind, that's what you're thinking, because you keep assuming that people who play these games are going to develop ideas of how to kill people, or use the ideas that they learn from their boot camp is going to teach them how to shoot up a school. That's not the case at all. A lot of people have a moral code. A lot of people don't want to break the law, and even if they don't have a moral code, it sucks to go away to prison for some odd years, and I doubt people are going to just waste their life on that, at least for the most part, that is. Again, it goes to show video games are not to blame here, and you shouldn't be ruining an entire industry just because you think it might stop those minority of gamers from developing ideas to kill people. And none of your ideas are going to theoretically work at all. I mean, there's just no way. You have to assume that gamers are stupid in order for any of this to work. You have to assume that gamers have never heard of what a gun is, have never touched a gun in their life, and have no access to internet. You're going to be really hard-pressed to find somebody like this unless they're Amish. So, on paper, none of your suggestions are going to work, and you're going to ruin an entire industry for this bullshit. Oh, and he continues, robots move and are shaped differently from humans, but designers can animate them to move much faster than humans, or to have skills that humans don't, like flying. Hence, virtual reality would teach skills that would not work as well when aiming at people. Yeah, because aiming at a cuboid flying thing isn't the same thing as aiming at a humanoid-esque looking human that's sitting on the ground and potentially easier to shoot at. Again, you keep thinking gamers are retarded. Oh, the thing I'm trying to shoot at isn't like this robot-looking thing. I have no clue if my bullets are going to work on it. Should I aim a little bit higher? Or maybe I should aim at myself and end it all. Jeremy keeps calling me a retard. Utter bullshit. I don't need to continue with that point. This is my favorite paragraph, by the way. He says, in a perfect world, perhaps we wouldn't have virtual shooters at all. But for as long as we've had media, people have always delighted in violent content. And in that perfect world, I wouldn't feel so perfect. I wouldn't feel so happy in that world. Because a lot of the games that I play, personally, are shooters. I enjoy shooters. They're the best mode of competitive play that I've ever seen in my life. That, and they're fun. Do I need another reason? Tries to justify it by saying, some of my own favorite science fiction films and television series are gory and terrifying. The US Supreme Court has ruled that violent video games are a protective form of free speech, and for years the top-selling video games have been first-person shooters. Gee, I wonder why. Maybe because first-person shooters are not only marketed more AAA-esque than other games, but perhaps it could also do with the fact that humans are inherently competitive. And what better way to compete than use an everyday tool that you hear a lot about, a gun, and then use that to complete an objective? Okay, fine, we'll just scratch that. We'll just, go chivalry medieval warfare here and just use swords and crossbows. Okay, maybe scratch that. We'll just play football where we tackle people. Sounds a bit more physical than safe, so I'm gonna say maybe we could play baseball. No, because you're using a metal bat to hit a ball really hard, and that can be transferred to hitting someone in the head, so we don't want to do all that. Maybe we just won't have video games or sports or anything that could potentially be unsafe, because that's my perfect world. And then the final paragraph comes. It could not have come any faster. I'm sorry. Jeremy states, virtual reality is on the cusp of becoming a mainstream consumer product, and every year content becomes more and more realistic. Lucky for the designing companies, they have a little more time to think through some of the potential negative consequences of what they're creating. And I don't have to keep reminding you it is not the video game's fault, nor the developer's fault, nor the publisher's fault, that gamers happen to commit tragedies. And that these gamers have happened to play first-person shooters in the past, one of which thinks, oh, I've used a hollow sight in Call of Duty, that increased my ability to acquire targets. It couldn't have possibly been the fact that I had aim lock on because I was playing on console. Or maybe I wasn't. Maybe I'm just moving a mouse to aim at people's heads, because that's the same thing as moving your arm with a 5-pound object to line up both sights, the back and the front, with the target, and then shoot, and then control the recoil to aim back at the target to shoot again, potentially a moving target. Because gaming skills are transferable. Moving pixels on a screen is the same thing as picking up a gun and shooting it. Now with these VR controllers out, ooh, now they can actually move the controller in the slight direction where a gun could be, use their eyes to aim up the sights in the video game, and then shoot. Jeremy, maybe you don't see how wrong you are when you wrote this article. Maybe it's been some time and you were hit in the back of the head with some common sense. But I hope everyone else watching this video sees how much of a fool you are in thinking that you can ruin a video gaming industry in hopes of preventing mass shootings, when in all reality, that video game industry is not even close to the cause of actual mass shootings. It is not the video game's fault that mass shootings happen. It is not the gun's fault that mass shootings happen. It is the person's fault. It is the person behind the gun, behind the controller, behind the trigger. They are the ones to blame. Stop picking different targets and thinking you can get on your high horse and solve this very complex issue and think that, wow, you're doing a good thing for the community. You came up with a solution that would ultimately ruin a hobby that you have no interest in, and thus no reason to protect, and call yourself the savior, the protector, the person who found a way to end school shootings, to end mass shootings. Guns aren't the problem. Video games aren't the problem. It's mental health. It's the people. It's someone who has been deranged, or abused, or neglected in life, that has been driven to the point of doing drastic things in order to achieve their goal. Mass shootings are a tragedy. Don't turn it into a political issue. The obvious answer is this. It's the mental illnesses that are the problem here. That answer should have been obvious when we first started. When the first mass shooting happened, the first thing that crossed everyone's mind was, I wonder what's wrong with him in the head. You're not going to ruin a video game industry and expect that serial killers, psychopaths, or just other random crazy people, they're not going to find another way to learn how to kill people. You're not going to ruin movies and expect the same thing. You're not going to ruin the internet and expect the same thing. We have to deal with this at its root cause, which is mental illness. You can keep taking shit away from people, whether it's entertainment, like video games, movies, plays, fucking books, or take away guns. But the only thing you're doing is you're ruining it for the people who aren't criminals, which is the majority of society. And furthermore, it's not going to stop crimes from happening either. The will to kill does not go away when guns do, or when video games do, or when movies do, or when the internet does. The will to commit a mass murder, the will to commit crimes is going to go away when people are, first of all, not poor and not desperate and not in a situation where they feel forced to do something that they'd rather not, or to take drastic measures. Two, when people are educated about the law. When edgy rebel teens decide to break the law for thrill, go away. And when mental illnesses are taken care of. Then and only then will we have a crime-free, perfect world. What are you going to do to achieve those things? Those are what you should be focusing on, instead of taking shit away from these crazy idiots. Because they're just going to find something else, and you're going to find a reason to take the thing that they used away as well. And you're going to just keep ruining it for the majority of society. And with that, I'm going to end this video. This video did end up getting a lot more political than I thought it would, but what do I expect when I deal with talking about mass shootings? In that respect, though, this video was a lot of fun to make. Well, not while I was making it, because that article, though. Anyway, since this is such a beautiful topic, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it in the comment section down below, so feel free to do that. Also, if you wish to talk to me about anything else that comes to your mind, I have a Discord server open. Link is in the description down below. I'd love to see you there. And with all that said and done, I thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.
Mission failed. We'll get them next time.